LEGO has given us a lot of different sets featuring the Snowspeeder. The trouble is, none of them are very good. It's not that they're bad LEGO sets. I'm sure you could have fun building them and playing with them. They just aren't very good renditions of this iconic vehicle. I've spent a lot of time working on a LEGO Snowspeeder of my own. And I mean a lot of time. In the process, I think I've figured out why this little craft is so difficult to get right, and some ways that we can get around that. I am 2/3 of the way through my Rebel Starfighter project, and the Snowspeeder is the hardest one so far. I'm really excited to finally be featuring it on this channel. It contains 378 parts, and the instructions are free on Rebrickable. Now, I know what you might be thinking, the Snowspeeder isn't technically a starfighter. It's actually an airspeeder, but it's still an essential part of the Rebel fleet, so it's staying in the project.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What?
So, what's the problem? What makes the speeder harder to get right than an A-Wing or even an X-Wing? Mostly, it comes down to the Minifigs. Star Wars sources generally agree the Snowspeeder is supposed to be 5.3 meters long. For context, that is less than half the length of an X-Wing. Unlike the X-Wing, the Snowspeeder has two occupants, the pilot and the tail gunner. So the basic challenge is fitting twice the Minifigs in less than half the space. That assumes we're keeping to roughly the same scale, which is kind of the whole point of this project. The Snowspeeder also has an extremely, almost impossibly, low profile. Do you see what I'm getting at? Where does his body go? It's a tight fit, to say the least. To get a minifig inside a perfectly screen-accurate Snowspeeder, we'd probably have to use one of these freakishly small bodies from the Drome Racers theme. Hey, it is the right color. LEGO has two main options for fitting a minifig in a small cockpit. If the cockpit is too low, you can lay them almost flat. Most fans don't love the coffin cockpit look, but it works. On the other hand, if the cockpit is too short, you can sit them straight up. But the Snowspeeder is small in both dimensions. It is short and low. So neither solution really applies here. This is the part of the video where I normally talk about what I like and don't like from the official sets and explain which elements I'm borrowing. Looking at these sets, there's not much I want to borrow. There's one official set that inspired some choices in this design. It both is and isn't a Snowspeeder, but we'll come to that in a minute. From 1999 to 2014, the LEGO Group made small but somewhat meaningful improvements to its Snowspeeders. And in 2014, they decided that was good enough. They essentially re-released the 2014 Snowspeeder 2 years later in the Assault on Hoth set, and again in 2019 with the Snowspeeder 20th Anniversary Edition. Now, if you have some of these, let me know if I've missed something, but to me they really look like they're the same. Instead of going over all of these sets one by one, I'm just going to take care of them all in one fell swoop. I have essentially the same two problems with almost all of them.
What?
A lot of Star Wars vehicles are in the ambiguous space between off-white and pale gray. But in the case of the Snowspeeder, it's clearly gray. There's no real room for debate here. It looks gray in the movie, and it looks gray in contemporary photos of the ILM models. And from what I've seen, the high-quality replicas out there are also gray. I'm definitely not the first person to make this case. I don't know where this white Snowspeeder idea came from. It's gray, end of discussion. LEGO even made its first Snowspeeder gray in 1999, but other than a few mini builds, it's been white ever since. My other major problem is the scale. For years, LEGO has made its Snowspeeders 18 centimeters long, for an approximate scale of 1 to 29. That is way too close to my A-Wing, which is 20 centimeters. Both vehicles are small, but the Snowspeeder should be noticeably smaller. Based on my fleet scale, I needed something closer to 15 centimeters. And I understand that these sets need to be oversized to make for better playsets for kids. I'm just explaining why I wanted something different. Working at 1 to 34 scale, I am midway between the oversized playsets and most of the mocks out there. It has several features in common with other Snowspeeders, which I think trace back to a mock by Larry Lars in 2011, but there could be one earlier. I also looked at the Hyperion Bricks mock from last year. I think that's kind of the last Snowspeeder that really made a lot of waves in the online LEGO Star Wars community. If I were working at a smaller scale, I probably would have just built that one. I built my first Snowspeeder before I even had the idea to start this channel. I was pretty new to mock building back then, so I had no idea what I was getting into. I have learned so much throughout the course of this project, it's absurd. My initial plan was to build a mock by Big Judge, then modify it to the scale that I wanted. I pretty quickly learned that shaving several studs off an existing design while keeping correct proportions is really hard. In this case, it was basically impossible. So I broke that snowspeeder down, pulled out every gray wedge plate I could find, and got to work. One of the most important decisions you have to make is how you're going to get the angle of the wings. There are a lot of options, and I'm only going to list a few. First, you have toothed hinge plates, like my 2002 Jedi Starfighter. It's got some retro charm, but it's a garbage connection system, and this was rightfully discontinued in 2006. You could also use hinge bricks. They're an even older piece, but they're still around because they are incredibly useful. They are featured on the Sloping for California Designs U-Wing, which I featured in one of my earlier videos. Then there's Technic connectors, like the ones used on Jedi Bob's Starfighter. They are very sturdy, and several official snowspeeders have used them before. This is what I initially used. I went through a couple iterations that I don't have much record of, but I did do a photo shoot in the snow with, I think, the second version, so I can actually show you that one. This is what my snowspeeder looked like in January. And then, a much better and far more radical snowspeeder entered my life.
The Force Burner.
I've talked about my love of Rebuild the Galaxy on this channel before. This sub-theme is all about weird variations on familiar themes, so rather than barfing out another clone of the 2014 Snowspeeder, the designers were actually allowed to get creative. There is one other Snowspeeder adjacent set that I want to talk about, so you can expect a video about that sometime soon. After building the Force Burner, I realized that I was overcomplicating things. The underside of this ship was anchored by this piece. The wings were attached with these mini ball and socket joints, which came out when I was in my LEGO Dark Age, but I've loved ever since I came back. This is an extremely sturdy connection, and it can be positioned at almost any angle you want. That's definitely not to say this is the only way to do this, I just think it's really cool. The Force Burner also introduced a new Snowspeeder canopy element. It would be perfect for my Snowspeeder if it just came in the right color. Since we saw the first set photos, fans have been wondering when LEGO would use this element in an actual Snowspeeder set. Surely they wouldn't make an amazing new element for just one set and never use it again, right? I really hope not. The last proper rendition of the Snowspeeder was in 2019. That means there's probably a whole generation of LEGO Star Wars kids that never got a chance to own one of these themselves. For such an iconic vehicle, that's kinda crazy to me. I could go on a whole rant about how clone troopers have basically devoured the entire LEGO Star Wars theme, but that's a discussion for another day. The point is, we must be getting a Snowspeeder sometime soon. If it were happening this year, I think we would have heard an announcement by now. So, fingers crossed for next year? Whenever it happens, I'll be ready. And they better make it in gray. While redesigning my Snowspeeder this spring, I made sure it would be compatible with the new canopy. I figure it'll come out eventually, and I really don't want to rebuild this thing again when that happens. Seriously, I've rebuilt this thing so many times. Compare it to the one I teased in the X-Wing video, and you can tell it's not the same. I made some improvements to the wings, but then they didn't fit with the front assembly, so I had to totally redesign that too. Even more than cramming 2 minifigs in a tiny cockpit, this was the real challenge I had to contend with. The center panel is held at an angle. The panels to the left and right need to be held at different angles, and they need to be flush with the center, as well as the wings. To make this work, you need a small assembly with multiple points of articulation that won't fall apart when you look at it wrong. And you have to find a way to do all of that without bending any of the parts. There's a reason why LEGO just dropped a slope there and called it a day, even if it barely looks like the source material. When I realized I had to redesign this part, I was so mad. After a long and unproductive building session, I briefly considered just cutting the Snowspeeder and moving on to the Y-Wing and the B-Wing. Then my girlfriend pitched an idea. Combining the bar with toe ball with the 1x1 round snot brick. It was so simple. With a bit of patience, you can move the joint into position and rotate the plate on the stud until it fits snug against the center. You might need to readjust when you attach the wings. It seems crazy, but I've done it twice now and it works. I wish there wasn't a gap here, but what are you gonna do? I built a second Snowspeeder to test the instructions, and then I swapped the orange stripes for dark gray to make the Rogue Leader variant that we see Luke flying in The Empire Strikes Back. And I'm really glad I did this because I caught a serious issue. Okay, so while I was working on this model here to test out my instructions, I realized that I had a gigantic problem. Can you see it?
Is that legal?
There are several things that can make a building technique illegal, but the biggest one is putting too much stress on the parts. LEGO elements are pretty sturdy, but a bad enough technique can warp and even eventually break them. Some of the techniques I used elsewhere in this build are weird, but I don't think any of them are really illegal. This one totally was, though. I really liked this combo of the driving ring with the gear here. I've seen that on a number of other builds. And I want to be clear that when those other builders were using that technique, they were probably doing it legally. It just didn't work out with the rest of what I had. I was using one of these antenna bar pieces as the core of this assembly. It almost works, but the gap between these two pieces is kind of an awkward size. It's wider than a tile, but narrower than a plate with a stud. The antenna base has the same thickness as a plate, and it was only fitting because it was putting another piece out of place. I will do some things that LEGO probably wouldn't do in an official set, but forcing two pieces together like this is just off the table even for me. I really hated having to modify this design after the instructions were already made, but I found a way to make it work. I used a telescope piece. See, the handle here is slightly more than one stud long. That gives you just enough wiggle room to make this work.
I will make it legal.
By adjusting the position of the telescope, I can make sure that this gap here was still filled, while making sure that this bar connected with that clip there. And that's really important because there's actually not a lot holding this rear assembly on otherwise. This clip and bar connection provides a ton of really crucial support. No LEGO build is ever going to be a one-to-one match to the original source material. You're limited both by the LEGO elements that exist and how they fit together. But that's kind of the fun part. There are definitely some areas where I compromised in terms of accuracy, but I always had a good reason. I already talked about this in my A-Wing video, and I don't want to just repeat myself here, so if you're someone who joined in when my X-Wing video came out and you haven't seen the stuff from before that, you could always go back to my A-Wing video if you want a more detailed discussion of just my thoughts on LEGO design. As a consequence of fitting minifigs inside of it, I gave it a little bit more of a belly than it maybe ought to have. And the cannon should actually angle just a little bit inwards. This doesn't really bother me personally, I just thought I should mention it. Also, this model is really not meant to be viewed from below. If you turn it over, it's not terribly pretty. There's even a few gaps under the cockpit. Oddly enough, that doesn't really bother me that much because it's an atmospheric craft and it's not going into space. I totally understand if that's a problem for you, and they could definitely be covered up if someone wanted to, but I think most of the techniques that could be used to block this gap would also change the overall silhouette. For me personally, I would rather have a flaw that's only noticeable if you turn the model over, versus one that you'll notice from any other angle. I also really wanted to capture the lower air brakes, and I had a couple of ideas for how to do that, but they all resulted in a less stable model, and ultimately I chose stability over accuracy. The center panel here is probably a little bit oversized. That's because I wanted it to be 3 studs across so that I could fit a 1 stud stripe going down the middle. Ideally, you would have a 1x2 grille centered on a 1x1 stripe, but you would need a jumper to do that, and then that would result in bumping the grille out 1 stud too far, and that would just look kind of weird. For the grille, I've used a flat silver tile from the Catwoman Cat Cycle chase. It's only been used in one other set, but there were 4 of these in the Cat Cycle, so it's more common than you might think. I thought it was really important for this element to be flat silver instead of dark gray. That just gives you the opportunity to do a Rogue Leader variant, and then the tile will still stand out from the stripe like it's supposed to. If you know of any other 1x1 tiles that might look good here, let me know, I'm curious. Another thing to note here is that the cannons are way more detailed than they technically ought to be. Most of this should basically just look like a simple, smooth pipe. I tried that and it just looked kind of bland. I think this looks right even if it's not technically accurate. There was one little asymmetrical detail in the Snowspeeder that I did decide to capture. This ingot here is representing the doohickey that we see on the starboard side here. I do also just want to warn you that the canopy is a little bit delicate. Putting a window in the top really weakens it, but it looks cool. If you want it to close correctly, you're going to have to remove this printed tile and 1x3 jumper. They were designed with the force burner canopy in mind, and the brick-built canopy is a lot thicker and it just gets in the way. I'm pretty happy with how the harpoon gun turned out. I tried a lot of things before I settled on this. This is the space gun with the 2 barrels. I love this element. I've combined it with the binoculars. This also leaves you a connection point if you want to attach a Lego string, so that's fun. Coincidentally, the 2013 Snowspeeder did the same thing. I pretty much ignored the official Snowspeeder, so I didn't even notice that until I started making this video, but at least they got one thing right. You may notice there's a lot of exposed studs on this thing. I'm definitely a confirmed stud lover. To be serious, I thought that the build was a little bit one note because there was just so much gray. There wasn't a lot that I could do to vary up the color palette, so I decided to give it a little bit more texture. This way it's not just a smooth gray sheet. If you prefer a cleaner, smoother look, you could definitely get rid of at least some of these. I was able to sneak a little bit of color on the inside with these sand blue ingots. Sand blue, I think, is the perfect color here because it gives it a little bit of variety, but it doesn't stand out too much. And the cockpit is such a tight fit that I didn't want there to be studs for them to sit on. I think it would just be really hard to pry them out each time. When I had studs in an earlier version of this model, I would reach in to get them out and I would just get their head and torso and their legs would just be stuck in there. The cockpit is so small that they're pretty much stuck in place even though they're not connected to studs. You can, shake this thing and there's barely any rattling. Speaking of minifigs, who's flying this thing? Originally, I wanted Zev Seneska. He's the pilot who finds Luke and Han when they're stranded out in the wilderness of Hoth. Unlike Luke and Wedge, we only ever see Zev piloting a snowspeeder, at least in the movies. So I kind of think of him as the quintessential snowspeeder pilot.
Good morning. Nice of you guys to drop by.
Echo Base, this is Rogue 2. I found them. Repeat, I found them.
Getting the most recent minifig of Zev and his gunner in good condition would cost nearly $250. The most I've ever spent on one minifig is $15. For some people, that's probably an insane amount to spend on a tiny little toy, and for other people, that's probably next to nothing. $250 for 2 minifigs, I can't go down that road. These guys are expensive because they're exclusive to the 2017 UCS Snowspeeder. Buying just the minifigs would cost over half as much as the entire set. Seriously, LEGO fans, especially minifig collectors, this is getting out of hand, we gotta stop. So my next thought was Wedge Antilles. He's a common enough minifig that he should be reasonably affordable. But his gunner was only in the UCS Assault on Hoth set and costs at least $100. I hate this market so much. So who was I going to get to fly this thing?
Hobby! I've been hit!
Derek Hobby Clivian. Yes, he's one of those Star Wars characters that has a comically normal first name, was my third choice. But he's kind of grown on me. Hobby's backstory was explored in a Season 3 episode of Rebels. He's depicted as an Imperial cadet who defects to the Rebellion, alongside Wedge Antilles, who seems to be one of his best friends. Hobby appeared a few more times in the show, but he was a very minor character. He actually had an even smaller role in The Empire Strikes Back.
The energy shield can only be opened for a short time, so you'll have to stay very close to your transports.
2 fighters against a Star Destroyer?
That is it. Luke later says Hobby's name during the battle, but this is Hobby's only on-screen appearance in the entire movie. His line delivery is kind of awkward, but I think I love it.
2 fighters against a Star Destroyer?
It's like Hobby knows his odds of surviving the next hour or two aren't very good, but he's mostly just treating it like a minor annoyance. He's acting like his boss just asked him to come to work on his day off.
Distance to power generators?
641.
Hobby was supposed to have a bigger moment in the movie when he would have flown his snowspeeder right into the head of an AT-AT and presumably killed Veers himself and everybody else involved. Kind of like Arvel Krynid in Return of the Jedi. Hobby's scene was cut from the movie before it was finished, so we only have a rough idea of what it would have looked like. Legend sources have Hobby surviving the battle and serving in the Rebel and New Republic militaries for years to come. His canon history, though, is a mess. Some sources say he did crash his snowspeeder into the walker, but ejected before impact. Others say he died in the crash. Veers apparently lived, though. How come this jerk gets to live and not Hobby? Later stories even have Hobby's fellow pilots, including Wedge, drinking a strong liquor named the Clivian in his memory. Hobby apparently invented this drink by somehow distilling it inside the remnants of a hollowed-out R2 unit, so he basically invented the Star Wars version of bathtub gin. The Clivian is said to be a citrus-flavored, potato-based liquor, and I guess this is how I find out that potatoes exist in Star Wars. Alright. I kind of want to make a Clivian in real life. Sounds like vodka, lemon, maybe some triple sec. Although it's said to have kind of an unpleasant flavor, so maybe a splash of Malort is in order. Despite recent sources saying that Hobby is so totally for real dead, you guys, his databank entry still says he ejected. Could he still be out there? It's probably just an oversight, but what if? On the off chance that anyone from Lucasfilm is listening, I'd like to pitch a gritty survival story where Hobby is presumed dead and stranded on Hoth, fighting Wampas and getting trashed on homemade liquor. Where were we? Oh yeah, Minifigs. For Hobby, I've used the Snowspeeder pilot from the 2015 Microfighter, but I've switched the helmet with the one from the 2013 Gold Leader Minifig. In the photos and footage we have of Hobby in the cockpit, his helmet looks to be a repurposed Gold Leader prop. Those of you who've seen my droid video know that I am all about repurposed props. The same helmet was later used for Grizz Fricks in Return of the Jedi. That's now 2 Grizz Fricks references on this channel, so I'm gonna keep going and see how often I can get Grizz Fricks into a video. By the way, the more recent Gold Leader helmets are probably more color accurate. This one was just cheap and widely available on Bricklink, so I'm not worrying about it for now. Hobby flew with a tail gunner named Kessin Amis. Amis is a super minor character. We used to know what he looked like, but we don't anymore. Let me explain. In the 90s, the Star Wars customizable card game identified this guy as Amis. Lucasfilm later realized this is actually a photo of actor John Morton, who played Luke's gunner Dak Ralter. And this was confirmed by Morton's daughter. Now that that mistake has been corrected, there is no known photo of Kessin Amis. We can assume he's one of these guys, but that doesn't narrow it down much. I decided to use the pilot from the 2014 Advent Calendar. He's wearing the same helmet as Dak, which kind of adds to the confusion between the two, but I think it makes sense. If we go back to this photo, several of these guys have the same helmet with the Blue Alliance Starbirds. We actually see a lot of these in the movies, and it kind of seems like they're the default Rebel helmet. To my knowledge, our only confirmed look at Amis is this tiny glimpse of the helmet behind Hobby in this photo. The helmets seem to match, so I'm sticking with this unless I get something more concrete. I don't have the minifigs for the Rogue Leader variant yet. Eventually I would like to get Luke in his Snowspeeder uniform, as well as Dak Ralter. Like I said earlier, the instructions for this are free. Making instructions is by far the most tedious part of a project for me, so hopefully somebody finds them useful. Even if you don't build my Snowspeeder because there's lots of other good ones out there, maybe it'll give you some ideas. Now here's a question I've been seeing more and more lately. How much does it cost to build? Rebrickable estimates it would cost $41.43, but I'm gonna warn you, you should not trust those estimates. A lot of these are fairly common pieces in fairly common colors. If you already have a fairly substantial stockpile of pieces, you might be able to build most of this without ordering a single thing. Theoretically, that $40 estimate is the market value of all the pieces we have here. You will not be able to find all of these parts at market value from one seller. I checked on the stores that had around 90% of the parts, and they were charging between $80 and $200. People talk about LEGO prices being out of control, and they are sometimes, but the secondary market is so much worse. If you're seeing these prices and freaking out, I promise you, you do not have to spend this much to build a project of this size. Okay, at the time of recording, 363 of the 378 parts are available on Pick-a-Brick. Overall, they cost $42.57, and that includes a $7 service fee, which you can get around if you know what you're doing. Here's a screenshot of all the parts that Pick-a-Brick flagged as unavailable. Some of these may just be temporarily out of stock, some of them may have mold variants that are on Pick-a-Brick. Please double check my work because there's a solid chance that I missed something. I'm just trying to make this a little bit easier for people. If you've been using these sites for years, you might know all of this stuff already. But I had to learn this stuff the hard way, and I definitely lost some money doing so. If you're newer to the hobby, I would like to save you the trouble if possible. One last thing I almost forgot to mention, a while ago, LEGO changed the color they used for tinted glass. Fans used to call this color transparent black, but then LEGO recently introduced a new transparent black. The old color is now known as transparent brown, but I think that may have always been LEGO's name for it. Fans developed a lot of their own nomenclature for this stuff before we found out what it was actually called internally, so there's kind of some weird discrepancies like that. For every ship in this project, I've been using either a clear or a trans brown canopy, just depending on what that ship called for. Now, you may be wondering, why on earth would I choose a discontinued color? The thing is, trans brown has been available for so long that it's still cheaper and easier to find than a lot of trans black pieces are. I typically like some kind of color consistency, so for instance, I don't use the old gray colors with the new bluish gray colors. Something may eventually come up that forces me to reconsider that. That's just my position for now. Anyway, I was under the impression that trans brown was fully discontinued, but here it is on Pick-a-Brick, right next to trans black. They don't use trans brown in sets anymore, so they may just be selling off unsold stock, but it is there for now. I love all of the Rebel starfighters. I mean, obviously that's why I'm doing this. I think they are the absolute best Star Wars has to offer in terms of ship design. I've noticed there are a lot of people out there who are as passionate about the Y-Wing as I am about the A-Wing. I like the Y-Wing too, don't get me wrong. But before I make a video about it, I want to know what makes people love the Y-Wing so much. What exactly makes this ship so special? I would love to see your thoughts in the comments. I still have so much work to do in this project, so that's enough out of me. Thanks again to everyone following along. This has been a lot of fun. And rest assured, I already have some ideas for what to do after this project is over, but I'm not going to share them just yet. Let me show you what I mean. Uh-oh. That's lost forever.